Well, Russian President Vladimir Putin, in a video address, has called on the Ukrainian army to take power into their own hands, using the terms terrorists, drug addicts, and neo-Nazis to refer to the leadership in Kiev under President Volodymyr Zelensky, who is Jewish.
I say again to the Ukrainian armed forces, take power. It will be easier for us to come to an agreement with you than with the gang of neo-Nazis and drug addicts that have taken the whole Ukrainian people hostage.
Well, for more from Moscow, we can hear from our correspondent there, Nick Holdsworth. He joins us now. Nick, as we just heard in that soundbite there, Putin calling on the Ukrainian army to overthrow its own government. Tell us more about what he said in that video message.
I mean, Putin's messages are increasingly unhinged. It's quite clear. And it's quite clear that what he's doing and saying bear no relation to reality. So calling upon Ukrainians to overthrow their government is just not going to happen. Some Ukrainians, particularly those perhaps in the rebel-occupied areas of Donetsk and Luhansk, may believe Russian propaganda. Russian TV is pumping out propaganda. They may not believe that there really are assaults, missile assaults on Kiev and other Ukrainian cities. And even if they do see some evidence of that, they will say, oh, well, there are a bunch of Nazis there. Inside Ukraine, people are being handed out instructions on how to make a Molotov cocktail. And there was a brilliant video clip, a telephone video clip that I saw on Twitter or one of the social media channels of a Ukrainian woman. This is unverifiable, but it looked pretty real to me. Ukrainian woman going up to a heavily armed Russian soldier in combat gear saying, leave our country, go. And the Russian soldier impassively looks at her and says, no conversation here, move away, old lady, kind of thing. It's quite clear that Russian losses are already mounting. I've heard reports, again, difficult to verify, 450 military losses today in Russia. Sorry, military losses amongst Russians today during the Ukrainian campaign. The Ukrainian losses, hundreds of civilians, hundreds of soldiers. That video message by Vladimir Putin means absolutely nothing. It's another pack of lies designed for impressionable Russian people. But I think the Russian people are beginning to wake up actually from small signs of green shoots of evidence that I've been seeing, hearing and feeling myself here today in Moscow.
Yes, and speaking of the reaction of Russian people, we did see some anti-war protests in Russia last night. Yes, and speaking of the reaction of Russian people, we did see some anti-war protests in Russia last night.
We did indeed, across Russia, across 55 cities, in 55 cities across Russia, there were protests. Now, these weren't mass protests. This is not on the scale of the so-called white ribbon protests against Putin 10, 11 years ago, when millions of Russians came out on the street that winter, so-called white ribbon protests, because that was the symbol. That was enough to get you arrested in those days. These protests last night in Moscow on Pushkin Square, down on the central boulevard, the central shopping street, Tverskaya Ulitsa, running down towards the Kremlin, and in cities right across the range of this vast country are significant. There were 2,000 or more arrests. They're significant because, although small, they're enough to scare the Kremlin. Today, the Kremlin has said that protests will be cracked down upon, and there's been an order issued. This was ordered yesterday by Roskomnadzor, which is the Russian media regulatory body, saying that Russian media must only report government officially approved information. In other words, not allowed to report sources from Ukrainian TV networks, Western TV networks, etc., or anything even from an original source that's unconfirmed. Only Russian official information. There's an attempt here to stop the Russian people themselves knowing what is going on. However, they do know. I have been talking to ordinary Russians today as I've been out and about in Moscow, it's a beautiful spring day here, you wouldn't know that there was a war going on a few hundred miles to the southwest of this city. People are out and about in the parks with their kids, happily drinking coffee, etc. However, when you talk to them, even ordinary people who are perhaps not really attuned to what's going on are not very happy. I'll give you one very quick example. I bought some newspapers at the kiosk today. There's a lady, middle-aged lady, sells newspapers on the street. She's all wrapped up. It's quite a cold, crisp spring day, beautiful blue sky. I bought some Russian government papers, propaganda basically, on the front pages. Big picture of Putin on Rossiyskaya Gazeta, the official Russian government newspaper, with a verbatim copy of his war speech launching Putin's war yesterday. They don't call it here, but we all know it is Putin's war. I said to the lady, I said, look in his eyes, look at that man. Does he have a soul? She looked back at me and she said, no. I said, does he have the heart? She said, maybe. Now, that's an ordinary Russian, probably not politically thinking at all. I've talked to lots of other people. Nobody supports the war. Nobody wants this war. And as soon as the body bags start coming back, and there's already going to be 450, that will be the moment that people start, perhaps, hopefully, to think. That another source, very quickly, again unconfirmed, this source has consistently been very accurate. It's a source that draws upon people close to the Kremlin. The Kremlin's tried to shut down this source. It's a social media source, but in my experience over the last few weeks, it's been surprisingly accurate. There were reports to Putin last night, head of the General Staff, Minister of Defence, explaining that things weren't going quite as well. The blitzkrieg wasn't going quite as well as Putin expected. He was a bit irritated with Sergei Shoigu, the Minister of Defence, and the head of the General Staff, because it wasn't as expected. He wants his targets met. They were sent away to come back and give him better news next time. However, there isn't better news. Although it looks very, very bad, it's not going as fast as he would like. The Russians have even suggested that they're willing to send a delegation to Kiev to talk about possible peace talks. There are some reports that the Ukrainians are now ready to talk about peace, and they're ready to say that we'll be neutral. I've seen that on the Western wires tonight. And also the Ukrainian Member of Parliament who was talking earlier. Now, while it is true that there has been a higher than usual release of radiation from Chernobyl, that's accurate. It's probably not as serious as she was stating again on reliable Western wires. The Ukrainian regulatory body for nuclear power stations is saying there was a release of radiation last night. However, it's not at a critical level. That obviously needs to be monitored. I've been to Chernobyl myself on 2 occasions over the last 20-odd years. It's a scary place. You don't want to get too close to the sarcophagus covering the old nuclear reactor, but there are people living there. The levels of radiation are not ones that you want to hang around, but I don't think that's critical, and that comes from an official source. So the politician speaking earlier probably just understandably expressing fears, and really quite emotional. I don't blame her, frankly, for that. But this Putin's war is not going as well as he would like, and the pressure is beginning to show, and that unhinged televised address again today, another unhinged address by an increasingly openly insane man.
All right, Nick Holdsworth reporting live for us there from Moscow. Thank you, Nick.